Hey friends, Nicole here. All right, we're going to continue our series that has to do with the persona charts, and we're going to focus today on Mars and Venus. And I want this intro video to be one that helps you visualize Mars and Venus, hopefully in a new way, or a way that adds to your existing sort of concept. So what I want you to imagine is in your mind's eye, picture a wheel, and of course picture an astrological, like a horoscope, right? All the houses, like the natural horoscope with Aries on the ascendant. And you know, that first house in astrology, interestingly enough, the ascendant, you know, that's representing the horizon, the eastern horizon. So when you see planets right next to the ascendant, like in the first or the 12th house, if they're in the first house, they are just about to rise. And if they're in the 12th house, they have just risen, so they're visible. It's almost like the 12th house, the planets that are there are sort of just waking up, you know. That's how I kind of like to think of them. They're like they were asleep and now they're waking up, especially when it's the sun, for example. So we're going to use the sun as our example right now with this model. Of course, all of the planets, they follow the sun. The sun's ecliptic. That's why, you know, early astronomers called them the wanderers, because they were moving and they saw that there's a trail. So the first house, the planets when they're in the first, even though this is an angular house and we think of this house as being one that is, you know, where things are almost visible, or they are easily accessed by the user or by the individual that the chart is built for, I don't fully agree with that. And I don't think of the first house as being conscious. I think of it as planets that are in the first, we instinctively use. It's as though they're almost like a part of us. So think about when the sun rises. You know, you can see the sky as the sun's approaching. You can see the sky get brighter, of course, but then once it peaks up over the horizon, it's like, there's the sun, right? If you've ever sat and watched the sunrise before, you're waiting for the potential of the sun to rise, right? That's the sun in the first house. But then once it actually rises, you know, then the morning has begun. Everyone's waking up, you know, rubbing their eyes and getting ready to go to work. So as it moves then across the sky, it moves backwards. It goes 12th house, 11th house, 10th house. You know, by noon, if we had a chart that was perfect, we would have, you know, Capricorn 0 at noon up on the MC. And so as you then move, you know, as the sun then sort of begins its katabasis and it sort of begins its descent down into the 7th house, we have we actually see it move through the 7th house, right? It's visible to us. And then it hits the descendant, and then it goes down to the 6th. So it's kind of fantastic way of thinking of the first house, 7th house, Mars, Venus, Aries, Libra, okay? When you talk about Mars as an archetype, it is a kind of, in my mind, I think of it as, the word unconscious isn't the right word. It's just instinctive. It's instinctive, and it is the part of us. How are you animated? How do you naturally assert yourself? Okay, your Mars has a little bit to do with it as well as where Aries is located in your chart. It's a combination, but you know, if you have planets in the first house as well, those are part of your natural way of asserting yourself. So you have to pay attention to them and include them in your Mars archetype. On the other hand, over in your 7th house, if you think about that sun, it spent the whole day, you know, 12 hours moving through the sky. And you've gone to work. You've met with coworkers, or you've met with clients, or you've dealt with other human beings during the day as that sun was moving through collective houses, and then the 9th, 8th, and then finally the 7th. Then it's as though the 7th house, what have you learned socially? How have you learned to behave socially through your interactions with other human beings? The 7th house is an area that recognizes that there's other people who have their own perspective, okay? Now, another way to look at the Mars-Venus sort of polarity, if you're standing on your ascendant, and let's pretend we're standing on the ascendant and we're looking in towards the center of the chart, and then all the way across to the descendant, right? I think of the ascendant as like your eyeballs. You know, I think of a lot. I think Aries is a sign that's very much about like moving through the world and just like going in the direction that you're wanting to head in. But what's interesting with Aries individuals, a lot of times they're actually quite sensitive to their environment, and they many times like to learn how to improve themselves, especially if they don't have a lot of Libra. It might take them a little bit longer to figure out socially how to harmonize with other people or how to understand other people. But it's just like your eyeballs. Your eyes can see and they take in everything. Your eyes will never be able to see themselves. Maybe when we have virtual reality. That's my hope, is that then you can kind of like interact with yourself, which would be kind of interesting. But as things are now, it's 100% your POV. So when people say that Aries is a selfish archetype, or that Aries sons are selfish, there can be some truth to that if you have an unevolved Aries. If you have an Aries that's more self-aware, then you have a person who's a pioneer, who's actually brave in a certain way, and there is an element of not giving a F, about what this other person's going to think if I want to start this business, and I don't really care if people are going to think it's stupid, because it's what I want to put out into the world. So there's an element of just out of sheer almost not even realizing how it might affect other people, it gives a bravery. Okay, so now if we talk about these archetypes, the Mars Venus archetypes, we have the sunrise, sunset metaphor. You also have this idea that you've got boy and girl. And this is going to be sort of cultural. This is definitely Western thinking. This is and a bit sexist. But little boys are known for being, they're jumping off the couch, or they're shooting guns, or they're chasing each other, or they're pulling girls' hair. They just are impulsive. They just do things. Whereas little girls are, sugar and spice and everything nice. And little girls, they know how to be sweet and how to behave socially. What do we say? Boys are always less mature than girls. That girls are socially, they mature more quickly. So Venus is affected, meaning when you have learned socially how to behave with other human beings, when you affect your behavior, that's when you maybe bite your tongue and don't say the thing you really want to say, because it's not going to really make a difference anyway. It's when you tell a white lie. So that's the side of Venus and Libra and the 7th house, where if you hear people talk about Librans being like they're just people pleasers, which is true, but there's a deeper story here. It's not just about like pleasing other people to manipulate them. It is genuinely, if you have someone who's strongly Venusian or Libran, they care a lot about their relationships with people, and they are trying to understand this other person and what it is other person needs. So that's why you can sometimes have the indecisiveness. And when you think about Mars and you think about just people who sometimes have a weaker Mars function, they may have a hard time taking action. Like if you have a Mars in Taurus, for example, once a Mars in Taurus gets going, they tend to really stick with their habits, which can be a good and a bad thing, because they can get stuck in really bad habits. They can be slow to get going, can be lazy sometimes. But point being, your Mars is going to have qualities to it due to the sign placement that will affect the way you move out into the world. Your Venus, 7th house, will have qualities to it that show how you receive. How do you receive the world? How do you receive other people? How do you try to harmonize and to understand others? Okay, how do you get in fights with people? So, 7th house also is people that you don't like, because it's very much a house. It's like it's way over there. I'm right here on my ascendant, looking, crossed over there. The descendant, I see you over there. Now, what happens if I have planets in my 7th house? There can be, if we are unaware and unconscious, we might find ourselves going to find those parts of ourself in other people, not recognizing that, I'm actually responsible for those parts of myself. So sometimes if we have Saturn in the 7th, we may feel like other people have authority, or they have responsibility in our relationships. We might look for a partner who kind of takes care of us almost. And sometimes we blame our partners and for things that really might be our own stuff that we need to be being responsible for, right? It's like So we can project it. So we go looking for, if my moon is over in the 7th, for example, emotionally, my emotional security is very much, if I'm being unconscious again, right, it can be very much influenced by the people in my life, because I go looking for relationships that will allow me to feel a certain sense of emotional security. So we go looking, it's almost like a little ducky going looking for its mother. Where's my mom? Where's my mom? And they go looking for it in relationships, and they can be some of the sweetest people because they really care about their relationships because they have a vested interest in, you know, creating a peaceful, typically, not always, but peaceful atmosphere. So, okay, so whereas planets in the first, a way to think of them is the virtual reality game that if you watch that video I shot, think of this as a virtual reality world, and we start our game in the first house. And it's like if you have planets there, it's as though they're part of your uniform, or maybe you have like wings, or you have something really cool about your symbolic self that you just know how to use. I mean, I think if you had wings sprouted out of your back, you just like instinctively know how to flap them and use them. If you had them over in the 7th house, you may not know how to use them. You may have to have someone teach you. So like Jupiter in the 7th, people, sometimes they'll go to others for guidance. They'll go to others for wisdom. Anyway, there's lots of different ways you can look at this. So point is, when it's in the first house, when we're talking about Mars, when we're talking about Aries, this is instinctively just a part of you as an individual. How do you separate from the herd, okay? Versus Libra, how do you unify with others? Could be with the herd, but how do you go about finding and creating your social world? Are you someone who, some people have Venuses, or like I have Aquarius in my 7th, and so and my Venus is my 1st, and Libra's like in my 2nd. So second, well, really, it's technically, I mean, it's on the cusp of my 3rd. It's like I love people, love people, but also I like to be by myself because I like to do what I like to do. And so there's an element here of I like friends and relationships with people who are really independent, because then it lets me, but I also like closeness. Anyways, it can be very confusing. The point is figuring out, how does your inner Mars and your inner Venus, how do these parts of you operate? Okay, one other thing would be, think about Carl Jung, the psychologist. He loved astrology, or maybe that's over-representing him or over-speaking. He was interested in astrology, and he's written quite a bit about archetypal astrology. And of course, in his psychological writings, he talks about the anima and the animus being representing in the male, the animus, his inner sort of image of the feminine or of a woman that he would want to join himself with. He also is going to have an archetype of, the mother archetype, like the great mother, as well as Saturn, so I see as Saturn, is the father, which is the archetype that has to do with his security in the outer world. And he also has a Mars. So same thing with a woman, right? We have these 4, it's like it's the cardinal cross. And if you think of the Vitruvian, a way to look at it too is if you think of the Vitruvian man, right? Imagine you're laying in the middle of your birth chart with your arms stretched out. On your right side, you'd have your ascendant, Mars, Aries. On your left-hand side, you'd have 7th house, you'd have the descendant, you'd have Venus. And you think about how most people that are right-handed, it's easy to use your right hand, and your left hand, it's not an instinctive thing. You have to like try to write a word, and it's not as easy to control. So see, it's almost as though your left hand kind of doesn't belong to you. And again, you can use that to sort of think of Mars and Venus. You have to, if you wanted to learn how to use your left hand, you'd have to work at it. You'd have to develop a skill. So see, Venus is how you've developed like an affected behavior that you use when you interact with people. Okay, so hopefully this is helpful, and next we're going to film a little video on the deeper, not the deep chart, but the persona charts. And so I'm going to do Venus, and hopefully we'll have a little time to do Mars as well. So